Do you think this is legitimate? Like that it's okay to like, I won't do this verbal consent thing. I will just do my best to read the person. All these rules with you make the 90% of the move, and the other person makes the 10%. All these kinds of things. What do you think about that?
I don't agree. I think that the experience is absolutely natural. I mean, how did you feel the few times you had sex? You didn't
Mhm.
feel comfortable and natural. It didn't feel like you, oh my God, I know exactly what I'm doing. Let me just rip
Yeah.
my clothes off and rip your clothes
Hmm.
off. And then, no, of course, it's awkward. It's a new
Hmm.
experience. I mean, the first time I did anything, I felt super awkward.
Hi, I'm Ariel Pontes, and this is the Ghostless Machine podcast, where I have friendly disagreements over controversial topics. My guest today is Kitty, a community organizer, content creator, and life coach focusing on sex and relationship education, polyamory, BDSM, and other related topics. She is the founder of Influx, a sex positive event space in Bucharest. She co hosts Europedia, a Romanian language podcast about relationships and sexuality, and she does many other cool things that you can explore in the links in the description. Kitty jokingly refers to herself as a consent Nazi, meaning she thinks the only legitimate way to obtain consent is verbally. I, on the other hand, tend to think that such an approach fails to take into consideration the full complexity of human behavior and sexuality. Because of that, I tend to favor alternative ways to tackle the issue of accidental violations of consent. So, what do you think? Is nonverbal consent ever enough? Hi, so I'm here with Kitty. Can you introduce yourself quickly for us?
Yeah, so I'm a sex educator. I do a lot of teaching around alternative relationships. I facilitate this space in Bucharest where education around subjects of sexuality happens. I also do a podcast in the Romanian language on subjects of relationships and sexuality, and I do speak quite a bit about consent in these contexts because I want to make sure that the people who end up in the spaces that I facilitate do have an awareness and more knowledge around consent, which is quite a complex subject.
Yeah, indeed. So the first question I have for you is where do you think we disagree and agree?
Well, I don't know. That would depend.
First, where you think we agree or what we have in common, and then
Well,
where you think we might disagree.
what kind of consent are we talking about? Because there are multiple kinds of consent. There's continuous consent that exists in ongoing
Mhm.
long-term relationships. There's on-spot consent for things that, like a first date, for example, when you kiss somebody for the first time. um, and all of these things differ quite a lot. There's consent in different power relationships,
Mhm.
manifests quite differently. So I don't know. I would have to find out your opinion on all of these things because, as I said,
Okay.
consent is quite a complex subject.
Okay. I mean, I can start by telling you what I think we have in common. I
Let's
mean,
go.
uh, I think we both care about the ethics of dating at some degree, like the ethics of dating, the ethics in general, first of all, of course, but particularly in this context of dating and sexuality.
Yeah.
And I think we both agree that, well, abuse is a problem and it causes suffering. It's harm, it's a type of harm, and we should minimize harm. That's
Mm.
what morality is about. And where I think we disagree is that you seem to think that the best solution to this problem is this idea of verbal consent. You seem to be the impression that I have is that you think verbal consent is a moral obligation, like is the bare minimum that you should have, and
Yeah.
that there is no other ethical way to approach this. Is
Well,
that fair? Or?
I would put a nuance on that because I do think that there are people who do have a difficulty expressing things verbally, but consent
Mhm.
is a skill that you learn. And
Mhm.
as as is with any other kind of quality, there are things that come more naturally or things that don't come that naturally to us. But I think learning, educating oneself to express one's boundaries in a very clear
Mhm.
way that is verbal can eliminate a lot of the problems that we are facing around navigating consent, because I feel that a lot of people think that they're better at reading nonverbal cues way better than they are. And it's a very
Mhm.
tainted worldview. It's kind of like science, where we assume that science is extremely objective, but when you actually look at it, you realize it's a lot like I've just heard this on TikTok and I thought it was brilliant. A lot of science is actually autobiographical because the
Mm.
observer cannot eliminate their own stance, their own
Mhm.
notions about the world out of the science that they're doing, even though they start out with the best of intentions, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's kind of the same for me when it comes to nonverbal consent navigation, right? We think we know when people feel uncomfortable or they're not really, with us, or they're with us. But actually, when you look at the science of it, you actually realize that men in particular, cisgendered hetero men, are actually surprisingly poor at realizing what the nonverbal cues are telling them. And I'd like to mention this because I think it's important. And they've done a piece of research that was looking at how pornography and the use of pornography affects the way that men can interpret nonverbal cues about women's pleasure. And they
Mhm.
realized that a lot of men could not tell when women were uncomfortable or when women
Mhm.
were in pain. They interpreted those
Mhm.
as cues for pleasure because that's
Mhm.
what they see in porn. They see a lot of women who are not very particularly comfortable with what's
Mhm.
happening, but are moaning, are exhibiting all the classical
Mhm.
signs of experiencing pleasure, right? So their
Mhm.
views were very tainted. They thought that they could read what was happening very well, but actually, in reality, they weren't.
Mhm.
Yeah, I see. I mean, what I remember that we had some disagreements on at some point was about this particular kind of consent. Yeah, let's take an example to be more concrete. So, making a move on a girl, for example, on a date
Mhm.
for the first time. So
Yeah.
when you try to kiss, this is, I guess, difficult issue for many people, for guys like me. I don't know, and this idea that, well, you can just ask, or you can just, yeah, verbally ask for consent, somehow seems very counterintuitive to a lot of people today. I think today in our mainstream culture, this is still, I mean, it's changing slowly, but mostly in our bubble. I feel like when I encounter, you know, random people from dating apps, I don't feel like they are necessarily on the same page with you on this thing. I don't feel that they expect me to ask. I feel that, so in navigating this world, it can be complicated in that regard. And I chose so far. Actually, last time we talked about this, I had never tried to ask
Okay.
or to receive verbal consent in any way.
Mhm.
And I had, well, perhaps missed some opportunities because I'm a bit anxious. So if I and I am pessimistic, so I tend to interpret everything as a negative sign.
Yeah, fair
But
enough.
this is my mechanism to avoid harming people. Also, like I'm like, okay, this is too risky, so I won't even go there. But I tried a couple of times. It wasn't particularly successful. I mean, it was successful in the sense that this wasn't the deal breaker. But if I am to think of my experiences, which time it was nicest and it felt most natural, these definitely weren't at the top of my list. They were a bit awkward. They were a bit funny. Of course, if I have a good rapport with the person, we laugh it off and it's okay. But it's definitely clumsy, and because of that, and because I had this fear, I avoided this. And I think many people avoid this and they try to go for another solution. Do you think this is legitimate? Like that it's okay to, like, I won't do this verbal consent thing. I will just do my best to read the person, all these rules with, you make the 90% of the move and the other person makes the 10%, all these kinds of things. What do you think about that?
I don't agree. I think that the experience is absolutely natural. I mean, how did you feel the first few times you had sex? You didn't
Mhm.
feel comfortable and natural. It didn't feel like oh my God, I know exactly what I'm doing. Let me just rip
Yeah.
my clothes off and rip your clothes
Mhm.
off. And then no, of course it's awkward. It's a new
Mhm.
experience. I mean, the first time I did anything, I felt super awkward. When I started rollerblading, I was hanging on to railings and like trying to move myself without falling flat on my ass. And we can go to a lot of experiences out of human sexuality. Like the first time you do absolutely anything, offer
Mhm.
oral sex, try a new position, try
Mhm.
having sex on the washing machine or whatever, right? It's all going to feel awkward. But the 10th time you have sex on the washing machine,
Mhm.
the 20th time, let's say the 50th time, by then you're a
Mhm.
pro, right? You're like, I know
Yeah.
exactly how to coordinate my rhythm with the rhythm of the washing machine. I know exactly what I'm doing
Mhm.
here, right? So I do think that the experience itself is extremely legitimate. The feelings of the people involved are very real. It is awkward. It was awkward for me at first. I was like, oh my God, am I really going to ask? Oh, you know? But now it comes very naturally to me because I've done it so many times that it feels kind of awkward and weird if I don't ask or somebody doesn't ask me. And then I look at it also from the perspective of education, right? So let's try to shift our perspective to that.
Mhm.
Let's say that, I don't know, tomorrow we discover that actually there's a way better way to integrate play into learning, and it proves to be way more efficient, right? It helps the kids learn better, it makes the teachers lives easier, it extends attention spans, right? And you go into
Mhm.
a regular school and you tell the teachers and you tell the students, look, there is a better way to do learning, we've discovered it,
Mhm.
and we have to do this and this. What do you think the
Mhm.
reactions are going to be? The kids are going to be frustrated because it's not something that they're used to, right? The teachers are going to be like,
Mhm.
what is this bullshit and why do I have to apply it? I've been teaching for so many years, I know what I'm
Mhm.
doing, why are you telling me how don't you tell me what to do in my classroom, right?
Yeah, we are resistant to change, status quo bias. Right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it feels, obviously, it feels better in the beginning to do the things that you know. I mean, of course,
Mhm.
that's how we
Mhm.
all function, right? We like
Mhm.
to feel competent and we dislike to feel incompetent and inexperienced,
Mhm.
feel judged for our inexperience. And it goes, it's even more intense when it's like this, you know, affection, vulnerability of putting yourself out there. It's even more intensified. But I don't find that a good justification to not try to do things in a better way that would ultimately
Mhm.
benefit not just me or you, but all of society. Because I do
Mhm.
think if we were able not only to ask more for consent, but actually to put people in the spot where they need to think about their boundaries and what they actually want in that moment instead of like just being carried away, like, oh, I guess he's going to kiss me. So I guess,
Mhm.
you know, I think that
Yeah.
would lead to way better interactions for everybody across the board. But we just don't
Mhm.
have the education for that. And introducing it, of course, there's going to be a lot of obstacles and a lot of people who are going to feel, some of them, well, I'm doing things just fine. I've been dating for 20 years and it's
Mhm.
just fine for me. Why do I have to do this,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm. Yeah. So let me see if I understand your point. Like I'm trying to steel man your position, try to understand it from my perspective and my way of thinking. So
Yeah.
basically, it seems to me that you think that, okay, we have a problem. We have this problem with abuse and violation of consent, which is, of course, a problem. I agree. And we should mitigate that. We should do something.
Mhm.
Well, clearly, we need some sort of change. And your solution to this is, okay, we have to change society to some degree. We have to make a cultural shift, and we have to create this new social norm, which is basically that you have to ask for consent verbally. And you think that if we do that, this will have a net positive effect on society. It will reduce suffering, and it will, yeah, maximize well-being, basically.
I would like to make a small correction because I don't
Mm.
think it's a new social rule. I
Mm.
think we just need to extend an existing social rule. And
Yeah.
I don't know how explicit can I be on this recording? Like, how explicit can I be?
You can be explicit.
Because, for example, if I were to propose to you, Ariel, right? Let's say we're
Mm.
dating, right? And I would
Mhm.
propose to you, let's have anal sex. I want to fuck you in the
Mhm.
ass, right?
Mhm.
I can't just do it and kind of like, oh well, sometimes he sleeps in this position and I can kind of
Yeah.
maybe he, and the same would go the
Mhm.
other way around. Let's say you would like to have
Mhm.
anal sex with me. You can't just
Yeah.
get up there. I mean, you have to kind of bring it to the table,
Yeah. That's true.
discuss it, see how I feel
Mhm.
about it. So we already have this notion of verbal consent is just very limited
Mhm.
to those things that are obvious violations to us when we don't
Yeah.
have verbal consent. We tend to see smaller things as not really that important or not really that damaging, but they can be when they accumulate. And that's the
Mhm.
problem, right? Because one kiss
Mhm.
on a first date that wasn't really wanted isn't going to traumatize anybody for the rest of their lives. I hope so, depending on,
Mhm.
right? But in most cases it won't. But if it
Yeah.
keeps happening and happening and happening, right?
Yeah.
Small situations where you find yourself that your consent is not respected, you find that your boundaries are violated, right?
Mhm.
It creates a mental space where you're very much in the defensive and you don't
Mhm.
have bandwidth to think of yourself. What do I want in this moment?
Yeah.
What would I like to experience, right? It's always like, oh, is he going to kiss me right now? Maybe I should step a little bit away so that he doesn't try to, grab me. I
Mhm.
don't know if I'm ready for this. Is it going to be awkward if I tell him not to do it? You know?
Yeah.
So I would just
Yeah.
say, like, extend a rule that already exists,
Hmm.
right? Just to incorporate more interactions that we take for granted right now.
Hmm. So and you think that this is possible, plausible, and it's within a reasonable amount of time and a number of years, we could possibly change society and make things, and this would be a good way to solve the problem of abuse and violation of consent.
I mean, people who enter the BDSM and the kink community learn it pretty
Hmm.
fast. Like,
Yeah.
there, it's a common practice. You don't just go and do
Yeah.
people, you ask for
Hmm.
consent, right? You
Yeah.
negotiate that. And it varies culture to culture, and it depends very much on how many people at the top and in the
Hmm.
organizations insist on it. So if it's viewed
Yeah.
as a trivial matter, you will have cultures where this is not common practice. But if
Hmm.
it is viewed as a very important thing and it is advocated for, it definitely is very easy. In my experience, it's been very easy to pick up by most people as long as they see examples of it. That's also very important.
Hmm. Yeah. What about people who say that I kind of kills the vibe, or it kind of it's a turn off? Have you heard this opinion? I've heard women who say that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But like
Hmm.
anything you try for the first time is not going to be the most exciting thing you've ever done, right? Because there's a lot of
Okay.
nervousness. It feels awkward. It is awkward because you don't know how to do it.
Hmm.
You're trying it for the first time, right?
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that the first time, I don't know, any of these women tried, let's say, I don't know, a new sex toy, right?
Yeah.
It probably was not the most mind blowing. I mean, I can tell you out of my own experience, there's very few sex toys out there. You try them for the first time and your mind is blown. Most of them take quite a bit of adjustment. You know, you're like,
Yeah.
I don't know, is it going this way up? I don't know. The
Hmm.
vibrations, is it this
But
vibration, is it that vibration, you know?
yeah, but you think this is all there is to it? Because for me, I mean, I can't help but think that you know humans are complicated, and especially dating, and especially like yeah, how men and women communicate in the context of dating and sexuality, etc. And
Mhm.
I mean, me, I'm a nerdy guy. I was, especially growing up as a teenager, I was like called autistic by the other kids. I was nerdy. I didn't have friends. So I didn't know. It was very hard for me to figure all these things out. And for me, the way that I did it is just like, okay, trial and error, observation, copying other people, very methodical, like very
Mhm.
much like a programmer. Okay, this is how you socialize. Okay, let me learn. And one thing I noticed is that yeah, as much as in a way it's convenient to me what you're preaching, because I it's perfect. It's like you give me an algorithm. It's what I want. But what I learned trying to find algorithms all my life is that there are no algorithms for certain things, and people like, and this is also something interesting. People like sometimes that there is no algorithm. People like the tension. People like the risk. People like this. It feels like excitement to them. To a lot of people, especially in this realm of dating and sexuality, a lot of these things that people experience as excitement, novelty, something, yeah, basically maybe hot or cool,
Yeah,
interesting.
but that usually
Yeah.
happens with all of status quo, right? So if you would
Mm.
go back in time 100 years, right, you would ask the women who didn't have a right to vote, didn't have the right to have property, and would have to listen to their husbands. Is this good for you? Do you enjoy it? And I'm willing to bet that most of the women, if you told them, hey, would you like to work and have the right to vote, would be like, do the what and the what? Huh?
Mm.
That's not what women do. That's not what we do as people, right? The women sit home and they cook the meal and they take care of the children and the husbands go to
Yeah,
work,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
So, of course, whatever it is that we're used to feels normal, natural, right? And whatever it is that we're not used to feels foreign, strange, and sometimes
Mm.
even inappropriate. But that doesn't mean it's the best way to do things.
Yeah, I don't. I think these cases are different, though. I think in the case of dating and sexuality, I think there is more biology involved. Perhaps it's more visceral, and of course there are cultural elements, but it's not like 100% cultural, right? I mean,
I
how is
disagree.
it? This,
I would
okay, I had a feeling that we would disagree on how nurture versus nature
No, but
stuff.
you have in human sexuality, you have from societies that are matriarchal, where there's literally no marriage, and the men
Mhm.
go from home to home, and they don't live there. They just can have sex with the women, but the women own all the property and do all the
Mhm.
initiating, and they're basically the leaders and the initiators, right? They tell the man, you come to my hut tonight, right?
Hmm.
All the way to the other side where you have men
Yeah.
who live in polygamous societies where they have multiple wives that either live all
Yeah.
together in sisterhoods, or they live in separate homes and the husband has to provide with all of them. And the rituals of dating, initiating sex, creating intimacy and vulnerability, they're different in all of them. For example, and I can give you this example because it's a
Hmm.
direct experience that I have. My boyfriend comes out of an Asian culture. I'm a Romanian culture. For us,
Hmm.
it is 100% normal and natural to hold hands on the street and kiss, right?
Hmm.
It's not anything weird. When we
Hmm.
went in his home country, this was weird as shit. Like nobody does it. It's just not a part of their dating rituals.
Yeah.
It's not part
Hmm.
of how people create intimacy. It's sometimes seen as like problematic when people get too hot for each other. You know, it
Hmm.
says something about the way that they're connecting that's not a positive. It's actually a negative. So
Hmm.
no, I would completely disagree. Like these are not universal at all.
I mean, I want to avoid to go too deep into this tangent because, yeah, we could definitely go there. I think, sure, I agree that there is a lot of malleability, a lot of variation in cultural variation in terms of how we, yeah, interact in this context. But I also think that the distribution, sure, all these cases exist that you mentioned, but the distribution is not even. I mean, sure, there are matriarchal societies, but they are a very small minority. And the pattern tends to be the other way, like men competing for women, which are a more scarce resource. I
If
mean, there's the whole evolutionary rationale
if you
explaining
want
this.
if you want to talk about a real pattern that is
Mm,
far more substantial and easily observable, it's not actually dating rituals at all.
mm,
It's
mm.
arranged marriages.
Yeah,
They,
definitely.
statistically, they are far more prevalent,
Mhm.
and they have
Yeah.
been proven from a scientific point of view to actually
Mm.
be more successful in generating happiness for the participants. So,
Mhm.
couples that have been in arranged marriages have been demonstrated over a longer span of time to be more happy together than
Yeah.
people who choose each other based on lust or affection.
But do you know if these studies consider mostly contemporary societies or also like tribal society, hunter-gatherer societies, post-agricultural societies? Because I would expect to be big differences there.
No, actually, they're mostly from what I know, but we can look at them. From what I know, they're actually done in contemporary societies. It's just
Yeah,
different parts of
because
the world.
the thing is, like, I mean, we evolved like, I don't know, 90% of our time on this earth has been as hunter-gatherers. And it's just the final few percent. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's something along the lines of 90%, 10% has
Mhm.
been post-agricultural. We spent 96% of our history as hunter gatherers and only 4% as farmers. And this shift, of course, changed a lot about how we interact. For example, one thing that I noticed, especially being, like I said, a bit on the nerdier autistic side. Excuse my sloppy language. I don't have an autism diagnosis or anything, but I do score 33 out of 50 in the Autism Spectrum Quotient test, which usually correlates with mild autism, formerly known as Asperger's syndrome. Is that women seem to use these these rituals, let's say, to evaluate whether a man is has skills or not. So like it's a turnoff if a guy is not reading or is not not managing to figure things out on his own somehow. I mean, sure, some degree of communication is good, but to ask too explicitly, I think it might be a turnoff. I mean, I would speculate. I mean, that it's to some extent biological there. I mean, could be. I mean, I don't know if there is research on that, like a survey. I don't know how you would approach this. But with the data that I have seen so far, I don't think that this is out of the question. I think this is a possibility.
But this is also a possibility that you need to take into account that you are the observer. Like you choose
Mhm.
interactions with certain women who might be more prone to view the world this way. For me, it's a super turnoff. Like if a man does not ask me, it's a turnoff.
Mhm.
He assumes he knows. I view that, I immediately translate that as arrogance. And I
Mhm.
do not want to date arrogant men. And I would
Mhm.
tell you that in my group of people, who happen to be
Yeah.
mostly women, a lot of them would view it as arrogance and would find it a turnoff rather
Mhm.
than a positive that, oh, he can stand up for himself.
Mhm.
Because these things evolve. I think where we disagree is how much this is dictated by biology versus how much this is dictated by what we observe in the social circles that we live in. And I would
Mhm.
posit that actually the social circles that we live in, and influence, and the people around us influence how we view what
Mhm.
is hot, right?
Yeah.
What is hot in interactions and what is hot in potential partners a lot more
Mhm.
than biology. And you can see this
Yeah.
easily because you would say, oh, I mean, if, for example, in gym bro culture, right, there's this idea you got to get buff for the ladies to like you, right? You got to be big, you got to work out in order for the
Mhm.
ladies to like you. I can tell you that out of the ladies that I know, and I know quite many ladies, you'd be hard pressed to find one damn typology that they like if it's not Keanu Reeves. Everybody fucking loves Keanu Reeves. Like,
Mhm.
because actually, the studies that have been done on sexual attraction in women, they demonstrate that we are far more attracted in traits that men do not appreciate in themselves, that they men don't view as appealing to women. Stuff such
Mhm.
as kindness, pro-sociality, stuff
Mhm.
like that is very, very appealing to women, far more than taking initiative. This is very much, to me, a male perspective. I need to
Mhm.
be a buff guy, I need to take initiative, I need to stand on my, I need to have money, I need to. When you go and ask the women, that's not actually what they want. What they want is a kind guy who will treat them
Yeah.
with respect, who will be
Mhm.
reliable, who will be able to emotionally attach
Mhm.
and be emotionally available. Which is
Yeah,
why Keanu Reeves.
but having muscles is a. I mean, I think it would be hard to find a woman who doesn't find it a plus. You know. Kitty raises her hand. Okay, I mean, I still think I'm still pretty sure this is
Sorry
like
to burst your
very
bubble. I
rare
really don't like them,
to
especially.
actively dislike. I think there's also an element of negative association that we start to create. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
like once you meet a lot of gym guys who are somehow toxic, you get okay, you start to have this association. But in principle, like I think for most women, it was still. I mean, do you agree that there are some things that are biological things that that women are attracted to, and men?
I don't think that that's the question that we should be asking here.
Mm.
It's more, how do we educate ourselves
Mhm.
to scrub out the parts of our
Mhm.
biology that are working against us? Because
Yeah.
let's say that we do reach the conclusion. I'm going to say something that might be triggering to some listeners, so I'm going
Mm.
to put that out there, right?
Mhm.
Let's say that we do reach a conclusion based on statistics and somehow we can discern out of biology, right, that males are truly better leaders, right?
Mhm.
Males should lead societies, they should lead companies, they simply have innate biological qualities that make them more appropriate for these tasks, right? And by the way, the
Mhm.
science does not support this. Actually, female CEOs do
Yeah.
way better. But let's say that we delve deep into the genetics and we find the gene that definitely says male CEO, women in the household, right? Is
Mhm.
that the way that we want to construct society just because biology dictates so? Is that the correct way? Is that the way that will bring most happiness to most people?
Yeah, well, so yeah, that's the thing. I mean, biology doesn't tell us how things should be. It tells us how things are.
Well, no, it kind of tells us a predisposition because this is also a discussion
Yeah.
around genetics, right?
Hmm.
Like, okay, it's written in your genes. Well, yeah, a lot of it
Hmm.
is also socialized, right? If
Yeah.
you just go like, oh yeah, and look, for example, when we discuss about how biology is, right? You would say
Hmm.
some people are not fit to reproduce because whatever, they have cancer genes, they have whatever. And then you've got, I don't know, women like Angelina Jolie who discovered that they have the BCR-A2, I think
Hmm.
it's gene, right, that causes
Hmm.
cancer. She goes and removes all the tissues out of her body that could cause that, and
Yeah.
she's living a happy, healthy life with a far longer life expectancy than her
Hmm.
mother, her aunt, and her grandmother.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
think
yeah,
it's
there's a
interesting.
predisposition, but that doesn't mean we can't work to better the world that we live in, despite biological predispositions, right?
I
We have a
agree.
predisposition for violence. I mean,
Yeah.
that's undeniable, right? You anger
Hmm.
me, I want to smash your face. Is that a
Yeah.
good way to construct society? Of course, it's a
Yeah.
biological trait of mine that I could be violent in certain situations. I should definitely go smash this guy's face because he
Mhm.
cut me off in
Yeah.
traffic.
Yeah. I just read this book, The End of Gender. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard
It's
of it, but I haven't
yeah.
understand it.
Yes, I wonder what you would think because I mean it's of course very controversial topics and everything, and but I agree with one thing that the author says, which is in these progressive circles there is a bit of denial of biology sometimes, and like that goes a bit too far because sure we have biological predispositions and we also have yeah cultural elements that guide our behavior.
Mhm.
And it's hard to know exactly how much of when it comes to any particular behavior, it's hard to know how much is biological, how much is cultural. Very hard to study empirically. It's very hard to you cannot just throw a bunch of kids in the island and see what happens. So and in another island with the control group, you cannot do that. So yes, it's very hard to know. But given everything that I know about biology, given my interests and about my interest in evolutionary psychology and things like that, it's very hard for me not to see that certain of these things really must be hardwired, because it just wouldn't make sense for them not to be. And culture sure affects us, but it's limited. And I think this is probably one of the disagreements we have. The extent to which biology dictates our behavior, I probably think is more than you think it is. And but most important, I think that there are moral implications, right, about this, because one of the things that the author also mentions in the book, and that I also observed, is that there's this tendency for, for example, a pressure on women to sort of act like guys in certain ways, like
Correct.
I know everything. For example, in the case of women who decide to be very promiscuous, have a sex with a lot of partners, it's like, yeah, you go, girl. Everybody has this attitude that, yeah, there are no differences between men and women. No, guys are not more promiscuous, and this is not true. We are all the same. And basically, like, to be progressive, you have to show that, yes, I can sleep with a lot of guys. This is what it means to be progressive. And she was criticizing this because she's saying, I see women suffer because of this, because they feel ashamed about things that they like. They feel ashamed for liking guys with muscles. They feel ashamed for not liking casual sex. And I think this is the risk here with this, including this thing, with this idea that if a woman thinks asking for consent is a turnoff, this cannot be by law. This is for sure 100% is a cultural thing, and they have to change. And I'm
But
like, what? Yeah.
I think we're moving towards a way more complex discussion, because this sounds a lot more like a discussion around waves of feminism, because
Hmm.
that it sounds to me like the author is criticizing a previous wave of feminism that's not really up
Hmm.
to date. But I haven't read the book, so I would not be able to formulate an argument around this. But
Hmm.
around the issue of consent, I think I would like to move back to the idea that I'm not shaming people
Hmm.
find asking for consent not hot.
Hmm.
I'm advocating for it being a more beneficial way for society at large to
Hmm.
initiate certain interactions that would lead to less harm to a lot of other
Hmm.
people, right?
Yeah.
Because you can take a lot of sexual preferences that people have, and the second that you add consent to it, they become great. And I can give you the example of rape fantasy. It's one of the most common fantasies that women have, right?
Hmm.
Maybe some of these women, I have talked to some of them, actually would like to for it to be 100% a rape. That's what gets their socks off, right?
Hmm.
They actually like it to happen in real life. I'm going to lean towards probably not. Is
Yeah.
it better if we do rape play with explicit consent rather than men just kind of trying to gauge which women have a rape fantasy and which don't?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is it gonna turn
Yeah.
is it gonna turn off some women that have that fantasy, and they're gonna feel like, it would have been so much better if you didn't ask?
Hmm.
Totally, yeah. But is it gonna lead to a lot less harm being caused?
Yeah, but
Also,
again, you're coming back to this BDSM context where I agree with you. This makes a lot more sense. This is much more important, or it's much harder to find an alternative solution. But in like day-to-day life, in let's say, yeah, mainstream dating culture, where you just go on a date and things are going fine, and the girl kind of expects, so if she is liking the date, the guy to make a move, and the guy kind of expects maybe some signals. This is something that I find simply, I don't know. I'm just not sure how plausible it is that this could really take off. I wonder sometimes.
but
And
but
yeah,
the alternative is that we also are not considering how much harm not doing this is causing. And it's
yeah, but
easy to overlook when you're thinking of what's hot to you. It's easy to
mhm,
overlook the fact that this actually causes quite a bit of damage. It causes
mhm,
quite a number of women to accept and tolerate interactions that they are definitely not comfortable with, because they feel unsafe or uncomfortable saying no in that moment, because they don't know what the guy's reaction will be.
mhm,
It puts a lot of women at risk who maybe misinterpreted whether it was a date or just going out for a coffee. So
Yeah.
we're also overlooking how much damage it can do not doing this, because we're simply looking oftentimes at just, oh, is it hot or is it not? And yeah,
Hmm.
granted, it could be a turnoff to a lot of people, but then again, don't we also want the most number of people to have more positive interactions and not have their consent violated?
Yeah.
Because
This brings me to another
I
question that I.
just want to add this, like when it
Sure.
goes great non-verbally,
Hmm.
fantastic, then great. But when it
Hmm.
goes bad, it can go really, really bad.
That's the thing. I mean, how bad can it go? Because, for example, I mean, I know that it can go bad, but then the problem is not even a problem of lack of skill, or I don't know what it is. Because I haven't really been in this situation. Like I said, I play so safe that it hasn't really happened that I made a move on a girl and she was like taken aback, slapped me or anything. So I don't know how it would be, but I mean, I approach it very carefully, and even when I do make the move, and even like a slight, you know, coming back, it would be for me enough to like, whoa, okay, sure, some guys might not read this, but I mean, it's hard for me to believe.
A
I
lot,
mean, it would
a
be an extreme case, and I think that would
lot.
be an extreme case.
No, like 1 in 3 women will experience some form of sexual violence in their lives. And it does start
Yeah,
with a small thing. It
but you
doesn't,
think it's accidental, or you think the guy is pushing it? Because that's the thing. I start to see malice when things start getting this bad. It's hard to me to see it as accidental. You know?
for me, it's not. It's very easy to see that some guys genuinely think that she's not really saying no, that she's
Yeah.
just trying to play hard to get. And they're
Mm-hmm.
going to push that bit further,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they've been socialized to do, to think that they are the pursuers and they need to push things, push
Mm-hmm.
the envelope a bit more. Because I'm willing, like, statistics support this, right? Most
Mm-hmm.
people do not have antisocial behavior as a pathology.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, if you ask them, they would say, I'm a good guy, I would never hurt somebody. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
so many women end up being hurt.
Yeah, because the few guys who are not like that, the few guys who are sociopathic or antisocial, they will hit on a lot of girls more than other guys.
No, actually, the statistics say that most of these women will be hurt by men that they know.
Yeah, that's true, but that doesn't mean that they cannot know antisocial men.
Yeah, but that's not the guys. This is the
Because
myth.
this is also a statistic that I read, really today actually, that this, the abusive men, women experience, let's say, quite a bit of abuse, and it makes them have an impression of guys that, I don't know, a certain, I don't know, I have experienced this. For example, a woman might say, I have experienced so much abuse that I estimate that, I don't know, 40% of the guys are potential abusers, but actually it's like 2% of the guys, just that they are so more active that they actually get to approach a lot of people. I don't know, I
And this
mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but
this
this
we
seems to be a
carry on.
factor. I read this in the 2015 book Mate by evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller and comedy author Tucker Max.
This we disagree on, because I think a lot of people have the potential to be abusive simply
Hmm.
because they do not know how to read their own behavior and the cues from others. And the
Hmm.
statistics are
Yeah.
there. Most women get assaulted and are put in situations where their consent is violated by men that they know, that they're very familiar with. It's
Hmm.
not strangers on dating apps.
Yeah, but that's not accidents, right? I mean, these cases of abuse are intentional abuse because
How?
your strategy of, let's do consent. This is a strategy to solve the problem of accidental abuse. I
Yeah,
guess maybe I should have, yeah,
and I would say that this
but
is,
not intentional abuse. It doesn't really solve this problem because if the guy wants to abuse, it doesn't. He's not going to ask for consent anyway.
well, yeah, of course, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of the abuse that goes on, a lot of the non-consensual interactions, they're not
Hmm.
actually, because again, we are born with empathy, the vast majority of us,
Hmm.
right? It's just how we interpret what would be the appropriate thing to do in a moment. And it's easy
Hmm.
to escalate from there on if you do not have a culture where it's appropriate to ask for consent before things. It's very easy
Hmm.
to escalate. It's very easy to put it in the bucket of, oh, maybe I just should insist a little bit more. If I just do the right thing, she
Hmm.
might say yes.
Hmm. Yeah. The question that I wanted to ask is, what if this wasn't an option? This solution. Let's just at the societal level just enforce the a verbal consent rule. What would be a alternative solution to this problem? Something else that we could do to minimize harm that happens accidentally because people failed to read each other.
I would say that actually, like doing some kind of a course together where you learn the other person's nonverbal cues,
Mhm.
that would be very
Yeah.
useful. Like just go into like testing rooms separately, and you show
Hmm.
the person like an image of I don't know, a scared rabbit, and you see
Yeah.
the the empathy, and then you show them a horror movie, and you see what the
Yeah.
fright looks like,
Yeah.
and
Learn to read. In
learn to
general,
read. But the thing is, learn to read that person's body
that
language.
person. But then that doesn't solve the problem of going on a date with a new girl from Tinder and
I
you don't
know,
know, you haven't learned that person yet.
which is why I don't trust
Hmm.
nonverbal communication that much, because
Hmm.
I've seen, so in my experience in BDSM, which obviously is not relevant in all situations, but
Hmm.
in my experience in BDSM, for example, even such a primal emotion such as fear is experienced so radically different in the body cues of different people. So I, for example,
Hmm.
when I'm frightened, I tend to hold my breath and I don't make a
Hmm.
sound. Like if I'm
Hmm.
really frightened, I will not make a sound. I go, you
Hmm.
know. And I've seen people, for example, the second that they're frightened, they start screaming their heads off. I've seen people who start laughing nervously, like literally they will go into a fit of laughter because they're so
Hmm.
terrified. That's just their body reaction. But if you
Hmm.
saw these people out of context, you probably couldn't read that, right? You'd be like, oh, this guy's having
Yeah.
a good time. Maybe something out of the facial expression could make you like pause and be like, what the hell am I seeing here, you know?
Yeah.
But people's reactions vary a lot more than we'd think, you know? And the only real in-depth studies that we've had from in this particular field have been from Paul Ekman. But Paul
Hmm.
Ekman, who became famous, there's like a TV show and everything about.
Yeah.
But he was, first of all, he studied micro reactions, right?
Hmm.
Which only few people can actually read, and those do seem to be universal. But he
Hmm.
also has been refusing for the longest time to let the scientific community look at his latest research and how he
Hmm.
conducts these experiments, because he's quoting that these studies have been used for federal whatever safety,
Hmm.
national safety, whatever, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
he's been criticized by this. And I don't
Yeah.
know, I must admit, in the last 5 years, I haven't really read into this particular subject. But I doubt there's been like radical discoveries on this in the past 5 years. I'd love if there were,
Hmm.
but I'm willing to bet that most studies that you would do on facial expressions would reveal that we have quite a lot more, like we'd have quite a bit of trouble reading each other if we don't know each other.
Hmm. Yeah. I wonder how different our opinions are. I mean, I like your discourse in the sense that I like this option. I like this, to me, since I encountered this idea. I mean, in the beginning, it made me more anxious because I'm like, oh, now I'm more afraid. And now I'm more afraid of making a move because now I'm afraid that they expect me to ask for consent and not the other way around. And now I'm like, okay, now I don't know what they expect. I don't want to turn them off, but I also don't want to disappoint that I didn't ask. But now, I mean, after a while, I start to see this. Okay, you know, is an extra option, is another an extra tool in my toolbox. What do you think about approaching it like this? You know, as an alternative, as a possible solution for those who want to use it, but not necessarily as the silver bullet that will solve this problem.
That's
Or you think
totally
it's
fine.
dangerous?
That's totally fine by me. I mean, everybody lives, I'm not the judge of anybody's
Mhm.
ethics, you know. Of course, I
Mhm.
have my own precepts and my own ideas,
Mhm.
but I don't go around like being the judge of anybody's
Mhm.
ethical behavior. But I think
Mhm.
I can give you maybe a better tool to put in that, like a better option
Mhm.
out of the three, which is
Mhm.
to figure out what makes you comfortable.
Mhm.
Because regardless, for me at this point in my life, regardless of how the other would feel about it, I would not feel comfortable not asking for consent, and I don't care if they're
Mhm.
disappointed or not,
Mhm.
because I'm
Yeah.
comfortable asking for verbal consent, and that's what makes me feel like a good person, quote unquote, you know.
Yes, but you're a woman. You can afford to have a lot of filters, a lot more than I can. So I mean, I don't want to go. If I start filtering out, oh, this woman thinks it's a turn off to ask for consent. Out. Then I will. I'll remain with very few people in my dating pool.
Listen, once with the appearance of Andrew Tate on the scene, I can tell you that right now the pool has diminished to nothing. Like, do you know how many men are fans of Andrew Tate? And now I have to
Yeah.
just eradicate them out of my life. Like,
Yeah.
basically, there's a drought, Ariel. There's a
Wow.
drought out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. One of the questions that I have is how confident are you? So basically, you think this solution is if spreading this across society or asking for consent would basically is the best solution to this problem. How confident are you that there couldn't be an alternative solution?
I don't tend to be very confident about
Hmm.
many of the things because I constantly question them.
Hmm.
But I would say it's kind of like democracy. I think it is pretty much the best thing we've come up with so far.
Hmm. If you
Is
would put
there,
a number on it,
I
like,
don't really do statistical numbers on things that are not sure. Like,
yeah,
unless
I mean it's very informal. Of course, it's not like some academic percentage that I'm asking, but just an informal way to gauge your level of confidence.
I mean, I can give you a number with the information that I have so far. I'm
Hmm.
90% confident, right?
90% confident. Huh.
Yes, but
Okay.
I always reserve like a 10% uh,
Hmm.
for anything new that might appear because I read about these subjects all the time. But I look at it more from the like these 90% are more from the perspective of harm reduction
Hmm.
rather than from the perspective of how comfortable it would be, how, how many people would like this as an option, so on and so forth. So I am 90% confident with the data that I have
Hmm.
so far that
Hmm.
far less people would be harmed if we implemented this
Hmm.
than are right now, or with
I
other
see.
options that we have available to us, or that again that I am aware of right now.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm close to 50-50, but
Mm.
as I mentioned, I guess what makes me resist is this. I just don't know how plausible it is that this could take off in mainstream society. I feel too much like this is just not how humans work. Again, it I like it because I'm a bit robotic, so it's a robotic solution. But most people are not. That's my experience in life, is encountering people who are not like me, and they are all very fluid and very, like, I don't know, informal and very
But it doesn't have to.
spontaneous.
Yeah, and it can
Yeah,
be spontaneous and it can be super hot, but again, you have to learn and practice how to do it, right? Like,
yeah.
sex toys are not spontaneous, and
Hmm.
yet women who use them find them quite hot after a
Yeah.
while. A lot of things
Hmm.
that we do in our mating rituals don't
Hmm.
necessarily come spontaneously. We learn them, practice them, and then they become hotter. And then we can put very
Hmm.
hot spins on them, right?
Hmm.
We can
Yeah.
innovate, we can find new ways of approaching the same thing because I think that a lot of people who reject the idea of verbal consent also have a very limited view of it. Like, you go there to the person that you're dating and you're like, and now may I kiss your lips?
Yeah.
Person
Hmm.
goes,
That's also something
ah,
I
yes.
something I learned, that is not the only way. It is definitely not the best way.
And then the other person goes, ah, yes, that feels like an appropriate option at this point in time. And then we
Yeah.
go like, "Mwah." But
Hmm.
that's not how usually verbal consent is done,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
usually verbal consent for people who practice it constantly becomes a very hot kind of interaction. One of the
Hmm.
versions that one of my friends gave to me, which I thought was super awesome, was just to get closer to the other person but not actually touch them,
Hmm.
and then look at them and go, I think we're kissing. What do you think?
That's
Right?
a good one. Yeah.
And that's pretty hot, you know? I had a lot of like tips. Like, I used a lot of these things that were not an explicit question, but I would, for example, tell the guy if I wanted the guy to kiss me on a date, I'd be like, if we end up kissing at the end of the night, you will have to help me find, like, redo my lipstick because I worked a lot on this. And then the guy got the idea. He was like, oh, okay, she's expecting a kiss, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't
Yeah.
have
But
to be when I'm advocating for verbal consent, I'm not advocating for you going there with a contract and being like, according to paragraph B, article C, my ma'am,
yeah.
would you agree that at 24 p.m.?
Mhm. Yeah. But again, I think it's tricky because as a woman, because of the imbalance in dating power, somehow, like a woman could afford to say something.
But
very awkward, and it still doesn't really matter as much as it matters for a guy.
but isn't the fact that we are not practicing good boundaries and good communication and initiative on both parts, isn't this a
Hmm.
reason, one of the main reasons why there's such an imbalance in the dating pool? If you educated
Mm.
more women to say no when they want to say no and to pursue the things that they want, for them to ask for verbal consent when they want something instead of just sitting there twiddling their thumbs and just like, is this guy gonna do it? Come on, do it, come on, do it, come on, I want you to do it, do it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't
Again,
that
I don't know.
balance?
I don't know if this is culturally changeable, or at least easily, because I still think that, yeah, this is part of the mating ritual universally to some degree.
It's not. If you
Perhaps.
look, if you go in queer cultures where
Mm-hmm.
these kinds of patriarchal rules go out the window, you
Mm-hmm.
will see that both people take initiative equally. There's a lot more non-verbal communication. There's a lot more negotiation. There's a lot more discussion about boundaries because
Yeah.
we're not
Of-
relying on
mhm.
scripted rules. The
Mhm.
problem is not that we cannot write new rules and they wouldn't become hot. The problem is that a lot of
Mhm.
people haven't really thought about the fact that they can write new rules
Mhm.
and that those new rules
Yeah.
can be hotter and better for everybody.
Mhm.
So I would say yes, teaching women that if they say no to a kiss because they're playing some kind of game and they're hoping that the guy is going to come back the next time and
Mhm.
whatever is going to tax them and is going to make them lose that guy, the next time
Mhm.
they're going to be much more assumed in what they want. They're going to go say, yeah, hell yeah, I want that kiss. Please don't go away. That would
Yeah.
be very hot, you know?
Mhm.
Whereas now they kind of have to play this game because there's also the
Mhm.
judgment on the other side. There's the guy that looks at them like, oh, she's a bit too easy. She wants this.
Mhm.
Oh, she must be slutty.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, like I said, I think the way I like to approach it is this as an option, and in that sense, I agree. I worry a bit that if we approach it as the only solution, people might resent it, especially people who right now, let's say right now, prefer something more fluid and something more informal, maybe because it's hot or maybe because it's more exciting. Even if that's the case, maybe they think it's biological, even if it's not, I don't know, and they might resent the movement. Or guys also might be like, this is too woke or whatever, because it's not what I see in the market, it's not how women act in real life.
But
But yeah.
I would say that a lot of the things that we as societies and humanity have introduced in order to prevent harm being caused were
Mhm.
quite fucking unpopular at the time, right?
Hmm.
I mean, do you realize that there was once a society where stoning was absolutely acceptable, and then at one point, a group of people went, dude, let's
Mhm.
stop stoning people. And
Mhm.
the people that went to watch the stonings, as you would go now
Mhm.
to watch a horror movie, were like, dude, what the hell? We loved our stonings. What do you mean not stone people? We've
Mhm.
been doing it for 100 years. We've been doing it
Yeah.
for 500 years. My great grandpapa showed me how to throw the first stone,
Yeah.
right? They don't feel comfortable when, I don't know, women's voting rights were introduced. Do you think it was a popular
Mhm.
option? Do you think people like went like, oh yeah, this is fantastic. We've been waiting for it forever.
Mhm.
It was riots in the streets. When we
Yeah,
introduced
again, I think these
the rights,
examples are different, but yeah, it's very hard to know, right? Like what's, again, because we cannot do those experiments with putting children in different islands and seeing what happens, we can never know for sure. But yeah.
I don't think they're very different. I don't think they're very different at all. I think there are a lot of things that we take for granted as human nature until we come up with the idea like, dude, this is harming people and we should definitely change it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And
But
then when
in
we
some,
change,
but that's the thing. There are many ways to change something. Like I wonder. I also don't know necessarily like what would be an alternative. Something very clear. I guess any basically paying attention to the other person, being having empathy training, like becoming a better, becoming better at reading people, or even a simple rule like this that I heard. Yeah, you just move 60% of the way and wait for the other person to do the 40%. I mean, even advocating for that, I mean, how wrong can it go? It's still not all the way to verbal consent, but it's still, it's a heuristic that basically should help a lot, I would expect.
can help, but I would think you'd have, in order for this to work, the reading, the better reading of other people, you would have
Mm-hmm.
to untangle so many toxic behaviors that we have in society,
Mm-hmm.
including the fact that, for example, because women are taught, cis hetero women are taught to be amenable, they will tend to laugh and smile a lot more, even though they're deeply
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you untangle that? How do you untangle an uncomfortable chuckle from a oh my god, he's kissing me? I mean,
Yeah, but
you have to untangle all of these behaviors and actually teach
mm-hmm.
people to be more authentic. And I guess if you'd ask me if there's a better way than verbal consent, I would say this: the second that we would have a society where people's boundaries are respected most of the times in most of the situations, and where they're consistently taught to advocate for themselves and be authentic to themselves and what they want, not only to be like when they read it, but also how to read it in their bodies, to be able to tell, oh, I want this, oh no, this doesn't feel good. That's when you would not need verbal consent anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Yeah.
think that that's way harder to implement
Mm-hmm.
than
Yeah.
asking, can I kiss you?
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think that was
Mm-hmm.
massively more difficult.
Yeah. Another question that I like to ask: what would make you change your mind?
I guess if I actually, so what I'm basing these things, my ideas on and my premises on are studies that I've read, but also subjective interactions with women, because I
Mm-hmm.
think they're a valuable in a world where most scientists still are men, and
Mm-hmm.
where they tend to ask women a lot less than they ask men, and men are still the standard for the average human, right? um,
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to social sciences, I tend to be a bit more skeptical of the results that I'm reading, but I have read quite a lot of them. I guess what would change my mind would be proper research into dating preferences for women and men,
Mm-hmm.
and led by like intergender teams that
Mm-hmm.
come from different perspectives and ideally from multiple disciplines. So I would like to see like anthropologists, I would like to see sociologists, I would like to see psychologists, all working
Mm-hmm.
together from different perspectives in order to put together both qualitative and quantitative studies on this.
Mm-hmm.
And if I saw overwhelming social scientific evidence that yes, most
Mm-hmm.
women would rather not be asked, and most dating interactions where nonverbal consent is like, or nonverbal cues are taken into consideration, work just fine, then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd be convinced. I'd be like, okay, that's what the
Mm-hmm.
people want. I'm okay with it. But everything that I've
Fair
seen
enough.
so far, it doesn't lead me to believe that that would be the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for me, it's a similar answer, but I guess also at an easier, less academic level, I guess just if I saw this becoming mainstream, if I saw this more and more becoming accepted, if I started seeing this maybe on TV, on TV shows, I see people asking, or because I don't know if I've ever seen, yeah, like in a, I don't know, I've seen, growing up, of course, I've seen like romantic comedies and whatever, and
Again,
it's not a thing, right? Yeah.
that's something that
It's,
we can advocate for as well, and we can create, right? Because
yeah.
the first interracial kiss that anybody saw on TV happened barely 50 years ago in Star Trek.
Well, in the US, you mean?
Yes,
I'm sure we had one earlier in Brazil.
in the US it was just barely
Mhm.
50 years ago, and that was an
Mhm.
international show, right?
Yeah.
And people were shocked.
Yeah.
Would you say that now you see interracial kisses on TV often? Yeah,
Mm.
quite
Yeah.
a bit, I'd say. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
No, how many gay people did you see on TV, or lesbians 50 years ago?
Mhm.
Zilch.
Yeah.
But
It's
now it's
interesting.
a commonplace thing, and you would think that it would take longer, but it's not actually. When people start massively advocating for a change, it does tend to garner quite a lot of momentum quite fast.
Mm. Yeah. I'm wondering here, I was thinking what would solve my problem is if I could somehow ask, Ask a girl, do you prefer me to make a move without asking for consent or with asking for consent? But of course, this seems like a kind of impossible thing to ask.
Should I
What,
break
what?
Aria, should I burst your bubble right now?
Yes, please.
That would qualify as verbal consent, and that would be super hot. You could totally,
Yeah.
you could absolutely totally do that, and that would be because basically you're just asking one step prior for
Yeah,
consent.
exactly. Yeah, it's a it's a sort of a meta
And that would be
question.
awesome. Like, why not do that?
Maybe I'll try this next time.
You can just go at the beginning of the date and be like, hey, I'm not saying that the vibes are going to take us there, but if the vibes take us there,
Hmm.
would you prefer if I asked you, or
Hmm.
would you prefer if I just make a move?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I didn't ask this explicitly, but multiple times the discussion has gone there. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was weird, but yeah, it's definitely one path to explore.
I mean, if things go well, if anything, it's going to create even more hotness because there's an anticipation on the girl's part, right? That you're either going to ask or you're just going to make a move, right? Depending on what she said. So it's going to be like, oh, okay, he already thought about this. Woo, nice. You know? So if anything,
Yeah.
in my opinion, it's just going to make things even hotter.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, we are getting close to an hour. What else do you have to say? If you have any tips or for other people who might be and also struggling with this question, any final thoughts?
Well, I would say don't be scared of changing things, even though they feel scary. All change feels scary. And
Mhm.
do focus more, not necessarily. I mean, I know that it's easy for men because you have a bias towards what other people want rather than your internal experience, right?
Mhm.
Make sure you know what the girl wants, make sure you do what the girl wants, make sure that you please the girl, make sure that you exhibit all the cues that make the girl feel that you're hot, whatever, you know?
Mhm.
But I would just say sit with yourselves and see what would actually make you feel ethically whole.
Mhm.
You know, what
Yeah.
would give you at the end of the day peace of mind that you acted like a good human being,
Mhm.
and apply that, because we all have our own set of values, and it's okay to have your own set of values and act in accordance with those, even if it might feel uncomfortable and even if it might miss you a few opportunities.
Mhm.
I mean,
Actually, I remembered another question.
yeah.
Do you think some people are too dogmatic in the way they approach this? People on your side, in a way that is perhaps can risk backfiring. For example, if they are too deontological about the idea of no, anything else is morally impermissible, and if you do, and you have to ask for verbal consent, it's anything else, it's totally unacceptable. Do you see this in certain progressive circles? Do you think this happens sometimes, and do you think this has a chance of backfiring?
Absolutely, but like
Hmm.
any kind of political stance that you will have, take your pick, right?
Hmm.
It will have people who are extreme on both sides,
Hmm.
right? And the
Yeah.
extremists, unfortunately, are often the most vocal and the
Yeah.
ones that are most likely to create problems because they are
Hmm.
as the example, because the other extremists on the other side point at them and go, ah, see, look at these people, they're trying to destroy our society, right? And the
Hmm.
extremists on the other side look at these extremists and go, ah, you're trying to destroy our society, you know? So yeah,
Hmm.
of course it exists in progressive circles just like it exists in conservative circles, just like I'm pretty sure there's extreme moderates on either side. You know, and everybody disagrees with everybody, but I guess for me at the end of the day, what I always orient myself towards is who do I want to look at when I'm trying
Hmm.
to judge the value of an idea. Because if I'm looking only at the extremists, probably what I'm trying to do is to find reasons to disagree with the idea because I've already emotionally decided that I
Hmm.
don't like it.
Yeah.
If I really want to judge the value of the idea, for example, I'm not a conservative, but when I do want
Hmm.
to read more conservative news and see a new perspective, I don't go and watch Fox News. I mean, come on, that is easy to dismantle in 5 seconds and to see them as ridiculous. I go and read Forbes magazine.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's where I gauge, like I
Mhm.
gauge what the other
Something
side
not too
is
extreme.
saying,
Hmm.
and their ideas that are of
Hmm.
value. Of course, if
Yeah.
you go into progressive circles and you're looking at the most extreme advocates for anything, yeah, of course you're going to find
Hmm.
plenty of reasons to be outraged.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think, though, even in the poly community here in Bucharest, I feel sometimes that there is a bit of this. There is this tension in the air that people, the main leaders in the community, or the people organizing events, they tend to be quite hardcore about this verbal consent. I mean, which I understand, especially in the context of BDSM, etc., or certain events. Again, when it comes to a specific event, if this is the rule, great. I mean, I just go and respect the rule. Then it's clear. Then I have no problem anymore, because then it's clear that okay, this is what people are expecting in this context. The
Mm.
problem is really when I go out there, and when it's clear from the beginning, yeah, then it's less problematic.
But
But
then,
I think because sorry, yeah,
but when you go out there in society, you're always only with yourself, unless you
yeah,
break some law, in which case you're with yourself and the police. But
yeah, but
out there, you're always with yourself and your own set of of norms, rules,
yeah.
and right things to do and wrong things to do.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I'm very consequentialist, so I'm thinking, okay, I want to not cause harm. Which rules we stipulate in order to reduce harm, this is very culturally relative. I mean, it depends. I think it's totally possible, for example, to have two communities with totally different set of rules that have equally good societies, but somehow work in different ways. At the end of the day, what I care, if let's say they could be two societies that in the end manage to reduce suffering to the same degree and maximize well-being to the same degree, but with different rules. So I see this whole thing as experiments, these experiments with rules. And like I said, I mean, when it's stipulated from the beginning in this particular poly context, especially in Bucharest or in places I've been, then it makes sense. But some because it's often described in a way that is a bit can sound a bit dogmatic. I see that people don't question it, even though when you talk about it, just in small groups, people are like, yeah, I don't really do that. Yeah, I don't really agree. But they don't. That's why I thought it was also important to have this kind of conversation, because I think it's important. Yeah, these both views exist, and we have to like at least acknowledge that and see where we can go from there, if we can converge,
I
or
agree, but
in what ways.
for me, like because you brought up this idea of two societies that can come up with different rules that serve their members,
Hmm.
right? Are we
Hmm.
focusing on are they functional and do they serve their members, or are we focusing
Yeah.
on harm reduction? Because if we're focusing on are they functional and do they work, then it appears that societies that choose uh, the version of dating of arranged marriages, they're
Hmm.
successful. Most
Yeah.
people in those societies will have more long-term attachments and
Hmm.
will declare themselves more satisfied with their pairings than people in societies where they have to go out and pick their partners.
Yeah, but
This
you sacrifice
doesn't
is
lead to harm
a number of
reduction.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, some
Mhm.
people will deeply suffer in those societies.
Yeah,
Probably the ones
exactly.
that are in arranged marriages that they really don't want are going to be
Yeah,
profoundly miserable.
exactly. It's like you give a lot of people like a decent life, but then
Yeah.
some of them will pay a big price.
Yeah.
Instead of our society in which nobody is doing so well, but at least nobody is
Yeah,
that bad
but nobody is
somehow.
like
Let's
that is doing that terrible. I mean, people
yeah.
feel that they have more options.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
this is very tricky. This is definitely, I mean, this is the criticism that people often bring against consequentialism. You cannot do the math. And it's true, we cannot do it. But at least it's better. I think it's better to live with this, aware of this fact that we don't know what a better action is, than to like come up with a new ethical standard with some deontological rule that say, no, just follow this rule and this is the right thing. And to pretend to know, because at the end of the day, we don't know either way.
well, I would say, I mean, what I would say is what we can do. Of course, we can't know. I don't know 100%
Mhm.
either. But what we can do is actually listen to the stories of the people that whose stories we want to find out. Because
Mhm.
if our focus is on what makes people generally more comfortable in benign interactions, then yeah, of course, go for nonverbal
Mhm.
cues. But if
Mhm.
the focus is on harm reduction, then I would listen to the people who are harmed and actually have
Mhm.
meaningful conversations with them with like, hey, what would help you not feel this bad? When it goes bad, what would make it better? You
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
Because if we're trying to go for harm reduction, but then we're asking most people, hey, would you be comfortable doing these things that donating 10% of your income monthly to help
Mhm.
prevent starvation? Yeah, no, they're going to be miserable. They're going to fucking hate it. They're probably going to hate your guts. Like, hey, look, if you give it just 5% of all your salaries from now until the end of time,
Mhm.
we could eradicate starvation. No, of course they're not going to want to do that. But
Mhm.
then you get to decide as a society, hey, should we take 5% and give it to, obviously, I wish
Yeah.
that would happen. Not happening
Mhm.
much, but hey.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that it's frustrating that this problem, that this discussion is somehow seems taboo. I mean, or often there's a lot of judgment. For example, it's hard for me to imagine, for example, like a video series of just like examples of what didn't work, like of guys that, for example, girls telling about their bad experiences, but in a way that's not judgmental of the guy who made a mistake, because I feel that a lot of times when I see things in progressive circles sharing about, basically the guy is portrayed as a total jerk or some sexist, toxic guy, and instead of just somebody who made a mistake. And because of that, I feel that people learn less. Like guys reject it too fast. Some guys, especially younger guys, yeah, Andrew Tate type, who are, well, at least tending towards that direction, they see this type of content and they reject it. And I think, I mean, as much as I may understand, of course, women are frustrated, they experience a lot of uncomfortable situations, but at the same time, I think that it could be very helpful if there was something, yeah, if there was more material for guys, some kind of ethical pickup art or whatever it is name you want to give dating advice, or from women to men.
But
But
there are
somehow,
there are a
yeah.
lot of men out there who make content
Mhm.
around masculinity and sexuality and male sexuality and dating that are very good role models.
Okay.
They are. They exist.
Hmm.
And this thing with the shaming, I mean, shaming is horrible either way. Of course
Hmm.
it is. It happens to women all the time too. I mean, she's
Yeah,
either too
definitely.
frigid or she's too slutty or
Hmm.
she's playing hard to get or she's some kind of gold digger or she's doesn't really want a
Hmm.
relationship or she wants too many kids or she's like rushing
Yeah.
towards commitment or she's not rushing towards commitment. I guess in the era of internet and fast content creation, I think
Hmm.
we should also educate ourselves besides on verbal consent on how to
Hmm.
put out there things that express our higher values and who we want to be on a higher
Hmm.
level rather than the knee jerk reactions. But often
Hmm.
what ends up in the public space is the knee jerk reactions. And unfortunately, these tend to garner more likes and more widespread
Yeah.
awareness. Right? They're the circus. You don't get
Yeah.
to see the women who talk compassionately about other men, just like you rarely get to see the guys who talk compassionately about women. What you often
Hmm.
see is, the super frustrated women who will be like, "All guys are fucking assholes. I can't deal with them
Hmm.
anymore." And you'll see on the other side, the guys who say, "Ah, all women are just the shallow gold diggers who just want you to go to the gym."
Yeah.
Because it's what sells. So
Hmm.
unfortunately, the content creators that do educate from a place of compassion and understanding, they do sadly tend to have a lot less views and to propagate a lot more slowly.
Yeah. So I think this is actually a good moment to end because you mentioned that there are people who are good role models. So we can end this by you giving us these recommendations and also telling us where we can find more about you and your work and what you do.
You're gonna have to. Can you put links because I have to search my
Of
TikTok.
course, I will. I will.
I watch them
I will
all
put.
on TikTok. I don't know
Yeah,
their names.
send me all the links and I will put them in the description.
I
And
totally.
yeah, for you and for your accounts as well.
Yeah, but you can find me on Instagram. We have
Mhm.
a space in Bucharest that educates people on non-monogamy and kink and sexuality, which is called
Mhm.
Influx. So if you search for Influx events, you will find us. I also do a podcast for the Romanians who might be tuning in, and it's called
Mhm.
Eropedia. It's very nice, and it's
Mhm.
got all of these like leftist controversial subjects if you would like to approach them. Um,
Cool.
so yeah, and I'm trying to remake my website, but it's been a slow progress because the
Mhm.
imposter syndrome is quite high.
I
That's
can
the
relate.
dent in my car, in my Jaguar that was speeding towards the relaunch of my website.
All right. Well, I'll add everything to the description then, all the links. And well, thank you so much for being my second experiment in
Thank
this
you so much for
podcast.
inviting me. I had a great time. I always have a good time debating you.
Thanks. Me too. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.